to this week's episode of the podcast. Yes, you have found the Bearded Fen podcast. Finally, if this is your first time listening or the first time watching or listening to the Bearded Fen podcast. Okay, sorry, I'm a little bit off my game at the moment. This week I've decided, after 35 official episodes, actually 39 in total, I've decided to take a bit of a break from having a guest and do what I'm calling the podcast check-in. And if I'm checking down here, I'm just checking my notes a bit. Just got some ideas on what I wanted to talk about. So, yes, you've got me only this week, which I hope is going to be cool with you guys. I've been thinking about the podcasts, obviously, quite a lot, thinking about where's the podcast going, where's it been. When I was sitting down the other day, I was chatting to a friend of mine and saying, geez, I've done 35 podcasts episodes, with guests. And, if I had thought about, I can't wait until I get to 35 episodes. If I thought about that in the beginning, it would have been this almost unachievable goal, if you know what I mean. But by just taking it one episode at a time, it's been great. And if you've been following the podcast since the beginning, or you hooked up with the podcast, sometime last year, you will know that I was only doing it every second Friday, and that this year I've ramped it up to doing every Friday, which it seems like such a simple thing, but man, it changes things, because you go from having 2 weeks to prepare an episode to only having 1 week to do it. But last year was the trial run, just to see how it was going. And if you happen to have listened to my first 3 episodes, which were not numbered episodes, they were just basically me getting going, just to find my feet, see how it was going to go. I spoke about why I started the podcast, and a couple of people asked me, why did I choose the subjects that I chose? And I can't remember if I actually spoke about that specifically in those first 3 episodes. But just to answer that question, the podcast being centered around motorcycles, tattoos, and craft is basically the things that I enjoy doing. And I was just hoping that, there are people out there that enjoy the same kind of things that I do, and that they would enjoy listening to the conversations that I was having with the guests that I have on. And when I'm out and about chatting to people, meeting people while I'm riding bikes or whatever it might be, going to listen to local music, I always have these, what I would call amazing conversations, and meet these interesting people. And I always want to know about where they're from, what they're doing now, where they're going in the future. And I just decided to bring those people onto the podcast. And it just so happens that the subjects that we're talking about are the things that I enjoy, which is motorcycles, tattoos, and craft. And, craft is a little bit of a loose subject, because there's so much that you can put under there. And if you've been following the podcast, you'll know that I've had local music, some fashion, that kind of crafty kind of stuff. Coffee. Recently had the Grind Greenery on here. And so, I'm exploring or chatting to the people that I would really like to have conversations with in those areas. And I hope you guys are enjoying it as well. So for the first year, I decided, because when you decide you want to do a podcast, you've got to think about what you're going to do, what you're going to talk about. And then you're going to say, okay, how much money am I going to spend on this? Or how much am I going to invest? Let's not talk about money specifically, because the investment is more than just, throwing in some money. It's about time and effort, and learning new tools, and, learning how to edit nicely or get better at editing. And even when you're talking on the podcast, learning how to speak properly, because I found out that I've got lots of what I call verbal tics that I suppose I knew about, but I wasn't aware that I used them so often. And having done the podcast for a while now, and editing the episodes, you hear these verbal tics, if you call them that, and eventually you start trying to get better at that. So I suppose that's the benefit of me doing this podcast is, for myself, I've actually put myself out there because I'm not really the one I don't really enjoy standing up in front of people and talking. I do it because sometimes I have to, but this is where I'm voluntarily putting myself out there. And not a lot of people know that when I was in school, I used to stutter very badly. I could never stand up in front of the class and do a speech or anything like that. And the stuttering stopped while I was in high school, but I still find every now and again when I get nervous, I do battle to, pronounce some of the words 100%. And I've also noticed when editing some of the podcasts that I've also done a little bit of a stammer there, which all of a sudden I became a little bit self-conscious about. But anyway, it's all in the name of progress. So I'm quite happy with the results of me starting this podcast in terms of how I convey myself. And it's definitely put myself out there, especially now, with a camera in your face and a microphone. I don't know what it is about a microphone and a red button when you hit record. It's like all of a sudden you get stage fright, where you might have practiced it 3 or 4 times before you've actually pushed the record button. So anyway, it's weird. So, and I mean, that's one of the things I try and do is when I have a guest on, because some of the guests have been very, not reluctant, but apprehensive about coming on the podcast because they also, like me, not really, they don't feel very comfortable having a microphone stuck in their face or a video camera. And so I try my best to make them feel nice and relaxed and just start and have a normal conversation, because it's not an interview, it's a conversation with someone. We just happen to be recording the conversation. So going back to last year, I decided that I didn't really want to invest too much money, but I was going to invest the time in terms of trying to put out quality podcasts in terms of sound and editing. But obviously you're limited by the equipment that you use. But in this day and age, the equipment is pretty good, and you can get away with buying relatively inexpensive equipment and get good quality sound and also good quality video. Like now I'm videoing this, I'm actually using my cell phone. I'm trying it out today just to see how it works out. So last year it was like a bit of an experimentation. I said I would do it for a year. I would see what would happen with the podcast, see if there was a bit of traction, if there was some interest, and then I would take it from there. I would reassess it at the end of the year, which I did. And I wouldn't say I'm big into the metrics, but I do keep an eye on the metrics. And the kind of metrics that I'm interested in is their growth. So the amount of effort that I'm putting in, whether I'm getting specific guests, or if I'm marketing it in a particular way on social media, or if I'm paying for their marketing, am I seeing that return on investment? And so there I'm looking at. So the metric that I track the most is, what is my average download per episode over time, and is that growing organically, or is that growing at a reasonable rate? Which I'm happy to say that it has been, and so that's quite encouraging. So I then decided at the end of the year, in December, to invest some money in the podcast. In other words, buy some equipment. As you can see, I've got some nice Rode pod mics. I've bought myself a Rodecaster podcast desk, and I'm currently setting up a podcast studio here at my place. So that should be ready in the next week. And then I'm going to be doing the podcasts in there, and so everything will be nicely set up. It'll be a nice environment specifically dedicated to doing podcasts and even voiceovers or whatever. I've already had people ask me if they can come and do voiceovers. We've done one already, but this time we did it in my dining room, not in the podcast studio. But the podcast studio will be ready shortly, and then I'll be doing my podcast in there. And I've got some exciting ideas. I don't really want to share them just yet, because I don't want to say I'm going to launch it on the 1st of April, April Fools, and then I don't deliver. I suppose I could use April Fool's as an excuse for not delivering on something. Is that all right? Nah. Anyway, so yeah, so I've got some ideas, and when they're going to happen, they will happen. But we'll see how it goes. So yeah, so I've now decided that I'm going to be doing the podcast at least for another 2 years, because I've invested a little bit more into the podcast, and in terms of time, I've streamlined my workflow, my editing workflow. I'm doing a lot less editing than I was in the beginning because I don't have to take out my verbal tics, right? And so I'm quite happy about that because, you don't really want to get bogged down in editing stuff for hours and hours. Yeah, so that's where that's going. Right, so that's the first year. I've spoken about the investment. Some people have asked me, a lot of people ask me, I say a lot of people that are business people, the first thing they ask me is, okay, how are you going to make money out of the podcast? So, I don't really want to be pumping the money thing. Because I'm doing this because I'm passionate about it. I'm not doing it because I want to make money out of it. But obviously, when you're talking about investment, you want some return on investment. And I suppose creating a community is one way of getting a return on your investment. Creating a community around the podcast, which is great. But it's also nice to be able to find some way to generate some income to cover the cost of running a podcast, because it does cost money. You've got to host your stuff every month. You buy some equipment. You upgrade your area that you're in, and so it would be nice to be able to offset that in some way. But obviously, you want people only to part with money, or even if it's bartering. You can barter. It doesn't always have to be money changing hands, but in some way, you want the people that are investing in your podcast to be getting value out of it. So I'm still trying to work out where that value is. And I've been, throwing out some questions on Instagram stories, asking, okay, what do you think about the length of the podcast? Do you want it half an hour, 45 minutes, an hour, hour and a half? Do you want video? What subjects do you enjoy the most? Motorcycles, tattoos, or craft? And those kind of questions, putting those kind of what apps are you using, what podcast apps are you using, and those give me a little bit of an insight into where people are at, what they're finding valuable, what works better for them in terms of listening time. So I'm looking at ways to create value, and obviously as I go along, and the people that I meet, you're networking with them, you're chatting to them, you're getting some ideas, and I'm percolating those ideas, and I will eventually come up with something that will be beneficial to you guys that are listening to the podcast, and perhaps maybe at that point that you would be happy to contribute to or let me call it support the podcast in that type of way. But that's not something I'm really going to be pushing, but I am looking at ways of creating value for you. Right. And also, I suppose I need to keep it fresh. It's nice to be having guests every week and talking about different subjects. And every now and again, I found myself, I went down a bit of a rabbit hole, and I was doing lots of local music. And the reason for that is because you get, you chat to someone, they give you a contact to someone else, and all of a sudden, you do 2 or 3 episodes in a row that are local music. And some people have given me feedback on that, and I've realized that I'm going to try and balance it out, which is fair enough. And I suppose that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this episode this way this week, because I thought, 35 episodes, it would be nice just to get to know. Well, I suppose what's happened is over the last year, you guys have been getting to know my guests that I've brought onto the podcast, right? The other question is, how much do you know about me? I don't know how much I've shared in the podcast as I've gone along about who I am, where I come from, what I'm doing other than podcasting and all that kind of stuff. And it occurred to me the other day that perhaps maybe you guys would be interested in knowing a little bit more about the host. And I'm sure a lot of you that are listening and watching are friends of mine. So thanks for listening and do know me to some level. But those of you that are listening and watching that don't really know me, maybe it's a good time for me to let you in on a little bit about who I am. So yeah. So often when I meet someone, and because I love to walk around with my podcast t-shirts. I'm not even wearing a podcast t-shirt. Excuse me for a second. Right, I'm back. How could I not be wearing a podcast t-shirt on my own podcast? That's terrible. Anyway, so whenever I go outside, I wear my podcast t-shirt because for some reason, people always want to know what's it about, which is cool. And so it's a good starting point when it comes to a conversation icebreaker. And so when I tell them, okay, I've got this podcast, etc., and this is what I talk about, and everyone's like interested. A lot of people don't even know what a podcast is. So I explain to them what a podcast is, where they can find it. Some people are podcast listeners, but they generally listen to podcasts overseas, and then not so many listening here in South Africa, but fortunately that is growing. So. And then they'll say to me, but is that like your main gig? And the answer is no, it's not my main gig. My main gig is I do software support and development for a mining company. And so I also do a lot of like data management. So jack of all trades really, but mainly looking after in-house written software and some off-the-shelf software and a lot of data management. Database design, data fixes, that kind of stuff, and recently starting to get into the big data kind of side of things, Microsoft Azure, and so that's my main gig. That's what keeps the lights on, pays the bills. But then I've got lots of hobbies, and one of them obviously is podcasting, and the other one is riding motorcycles, and then I also do 3D printing. As a hobby. I've got 2 3D printers, and I print for myself and for other people that want prints done, and that's called Marshland 3D, by the way. Well, I've got a brand, if you want to call it their brand, on social networks. So look up Marshland 3D if you're interested. And then also make t-shirts. I made this t-shirt myself. I mainly make t-shirts for the podcast, but I also do make small runs of t-shirts for other people, just if they're looking for something that I can help them out, and give it to them at a decent price. And so if you want to buy a podcast t-shirt, check it out. You can go to Nerve Apparel on Facebook, or you can go to any of the show notes for the podcast, and there will be a link there to the Facebook page, and from there you can buy a t-shirt. There's an online shop there, and as time goes by, I'll be adding new designs of the Bearded Friend podcast t-shirts, and hopefully come out with some funky designs. Maybe you guys are interested in buying a t-shirt, become a supporter, advertise that you're a supporter of the podcast. That would be great. Right, so that's me for hobbies, and that's what I do other than the podcast. And then the other question is, why is the podcast called The Bearded Fen? So if you were listening to the podcast in the beginning, you would have known that it was called the Nerve Podcast. So I had Nerve Apparel, well, I've got Nerve Apparel as a brand name. And then I said, okay, the Nerve Podcast. So I thought it sounded funky, it was pretty cool, a bit edgy, maybe not. Like when you hear nerve, you think that it should be like something extreme, I should be jumping, strapping a GoPro to my head and jumping off the side of a bridge or a building or doing something funky like that, no, not my kind of thing. So, but then one of my friends overseas gave me some feedback one day and said, hey, why don't you make the podcast a little bit more personal, a little bit more about you? You're the host, it's your podcast, so why don't you call it something, like, own your podcast. So I thought that was a very good idea. And the Bearded Fen I had already started using on Instagram. I changed my Instagram handle to the Bearded Fen. And why the Bearded Fen? Well, obviously because I've got a beard. And I've had this beard since 2013 and it's not going anywhere in a hurry. Because apparently I look more scary without the beard than I do with the beard. So there's that to consider. So the Fen comes from... And a lot of people don't know this because it's very simple. My surname is Marsh, and Fen is another word for marsh. And when I was in school, I used to sign off as Fen, and so I suppose it's always stuck around somewhere. I've often signed off as Drew Fen, which is short for Andrew Marsh. So, and that's where the Fen came from. And then I just thought, well, I'll just use the Bearded Fen because. Yeah, I suppose that's the identity, I suppose, the bearded guy. So yeah, so that's where it is. And at that point, I'm going to take a comfort break because I'm actually not feeling that well at the moment. Don't worry, I don't have the coronavirus, or maybe I do, I don't know. No, don't panic just yet, Mom. Please don't panic just yet. So I'm feeling a bit off color. I've got a bit of a scratchy throat, so I need to go grab something to drink. So what I want to do is I'm just going to pause and then I'll be back. Just don't go anywhere. Right, so I'm back after my little comfort break. My throat is still a little bit scratchy, but I thought it was a good time to have a whiskey, seeing that we're getting to know one another. I hope you pour yourself a drink and cheers. Salute. Prost. So, we were talking about hobbies and that kind of thing. So, one of the other things I really enjoy doing is reading books. Which, if you listen to one of my previous episodes, I did talk about this, but let's just do a bit of a recap, seeing that we're talking about hobbies or things that I enjoy doing. So I got into audiobooks because I was battling to read. I don't know if it's my eyes or if I just don't seem to have enough time just to sit down and read a couple of pages of a book every day. So I got into audiobooks and I thoroughly enjoy those, and I've been subscribing to Audible since 2013. And so I'm probably doing maybe 12, 13 books a year, which doesn't sound like much, does it? But I think it actually is. Anyway, and then I swap between fiction and non-fiction. So, I'll be, Dion Mayer or Tom Clancy or Terry Hayes if you want to read a really good book. I tell everybody this. I Am Pilgrim. Go read that book. You'll be amazed at how good that book is. Another good book is The Chestnut Man. Very, very good book. Go read that. And then also, on the other side, on the business book side, I'm currently reading a book called The Lean Startup. It's quite an old book, but it's talks about how like the pattern to have a successful startup, giving their book a bash. Go read it if you're interested in that kind of stuff. And I'm also into meditation quite a bit. I've just found that it's in this busy life and with lots of social media and all that kind of stuff. So I just decided to give meditation a try, and it's been working very well for me. And yeah, and there might be something in that line in the future. Enough said. Right, so talking about enjoying things in life. This is what I enjoy very much. This is Bushmills Black Bush. This is my favorite whiskey to drink. Not the most expensive whiskey. It's just tastes great. Doesn't kill the pocket. And it's nice to have one of these every now and again when you're celebrating something. I don't know what I'm celebrating today, but it's the middle of the week. I'm recording this on Wednesday night for Friday. Oh, I gave it away. And you thought this was live. Anyway, so I'm not much of a comedian. I think I'm being funny, but not too sure if I am being. Anyway, I'm not going to kill you guys. It's coming up to almost half an hour of me talking rubbish. But anyway, I hope you know a little bit more about me. I hope that you'll reach out and tell me how good or bad this episode was. Don't worry, I've got broad shoulders. You can tell me anything. It doesn't really matter. As long as I can find something positive out of it, I'll use it. And talking about feedback, I mean, some people have given me ideas on who I should have on the podcast, and for you guys, you know who you are. I'm working on that, so be patient. Those people are coming. They will come eventually. Oh yeah, talking about other hobbies, I love making biltong, and I love making chili sauce. The one thing I haven't made yet is beer, but I really want to do that. But it's like you need to be dedicated to that, which is a bit of a contradiction because I'm dedicated to doing the podcast. But and the funny thing is, I actually come from a chemical background. I studied chemistry when I left school and worked on the mines in the labs for a while, for almost 10 years really. So you would think I would know how to make beer, huh? Yeah, don't worry, I'll get there. Maybe I'll launch the Bearded Fen beer. Bearded Fen IPA. What do you reckon? Do you think that'll work? Never thought of that. That's actually quite a good idea. So, anyway, guys, things to look forward to is a video in my new podcast studio. And you won't be looking at my dining room wall with some dodgy stickers on the back. So, so I made that sticker. And here's some 3D printing products. There's a Red Bull sign. I mean, how's this microphone? Don't you think it's cool? So this is actually 3D printed. I just thought it was a nice little gimmicky thing that I can put on the table or in the background. I love these microphones. So when I was looking at buying equipment for the podcast, I wanted to buy these microphones. The only problem is they're limited edition. I think they only made 6,000 of them. And I think they're like, maybe not even that many. I must actually check, but I mean, they're quite expensive. I think they're $7,000 a pop, if you can find them. And then when I looked, I could only find one that was for sale at the time. But anyway, so I thought I'd 3D print it. What do you think? I think that's pretty cool. Anyway, right. And here is my Marshland 3D mascot. You probably won't see this, but this is also 3D printed, but this is says Marshland 3D on there. And this handsome guy here is me wearing a hoodie with a gas mask, and another friend of mine, Rick Trewick, Good shout out to him. He scanned me while wearing that stuff. And I think that came out pretty well. I think it's pretty dope, don't you think? Anyway, it's the kind of phone that you can have with a 3D printer. Anyway, guys, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Tune in next week for the next guest podcast episode. And keep it real. And that, my friends, is the end. I'll catch you next time.